Hey everybody, welcome back to my coverage of the PogChamps 3 tournament. This is the third championship quarterfinals game, Rainn Wilson versus MoistCritical, and Rainn is leading the match 1-0, which means MoistCritical needs to win this game in order to stay in the tournament and not be eliminated, and that would take us to a tiebreaker, which then he'd need to win the tiebreaker as well. So anything can happen here, really. I think these competitors are pretty evenly matched, so let's just see what happened. MoistCritical has the white pieces, and he starts off with e4. We see d6 from Rainn, going for his same Pierce setup that we've seen him take as black, and d4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7. Rainn continues with his Pierce setup, and MoistCritical continues developing, bishop c4. Perfectly fine moves, very good moves from both players so far. We have knight to f6, and now queen to e2. Knight to f3 I think would have been more principled, but queen to e2 is okay as well. We have castles and now e5, and this may have been part of the reasoning behind queen to e2. And here's black after d takes e5 and d takes e5. The question kind of is, where do you put this knight? And I think the best place to put this knight is on e8. Just sort of getting out of the way, and you can finish developing the rest of your pieces, and then maybe bring this knight back into the game later. And the reason is you can't bring this knight to h5 because g4 traps the knight. You don't really want to bring your knight to g4 because then there's this e6 pawn sacrifice move from white, and you can't take with the bishop here because there's this remove the defender tactic and you lose a piece as black. So you would have to play a move like f5, but then there's this really annoying pawn on e6, which could be an asset in the middle game or the endgame, just cramping black, and also the king is going to be weak now that this f5 pawn is pushed. Here is black. You can also play knight to e5, and the bishop is defending the knight, so after e takes f7 check, we could have knight takes f7, but once again, you have this isolated e pawn as black, and this diagonal is going to be weak as there's no f pawn, which in turn makes the king weak. So, you know, knight g4 isn't the best either. And knight f to d7 sort of runs into the same thing. We could have e6, and now this is just forking the knight and the pawn. So even if you take this, then you're going to have an isolated e pawn, and once again, this diagonal will be weak after king to h8. So for all of these reasons, I think knight to e8 is the best spot for this knight. However, we see knight to g4 by Rainn, and will MoistCritical now find this e6 move. Yes, he does play e6, which I think is definitely a very good move. And here Rainn does not find either of these moves, f5 or knight to e5. He instead plays bishop takes e6, which simply loses a piece after this remove to the defender tactic, which we've looked at, bishop takes e6. And here Rainn realizes that if he recaptures the bishop, he'll lose the knight. So he said, oops. He said, okay, I'm not going to damage my pawn structure for no reason. I'm just going to save my knight. He plays knight to e5. We have bishop b3, MoistCritical saves his piece, and now he is up a piece. So let's see if he can convert this. But there are still a lot of pieces on the board, lots of chances for both players to make some more blunders. So we'll just have to see. We have c5 from Rainn and bishop to f4, continuing development. Knight e to c6 from Rainn. Knight b to c6 would have been much better defending and developing. But we have knight e to c6, rook to d1, getting that rook on the open file, very good for MoistCritical, and also attacking the queen. We have queen to a5 and now bishop d2, putting the bishop on the same diagonal as the queen. Once again, very good from MoistCritical, and now e6, sort of trying to shut down this diagonal and also just protecting your pawn. It's a little bit safer on e6 than it is on e7. We have knight to f3 now. MoistCritical finishes development, and now a6 from Rainn. We have castles and now b5, and now Rainn is threatening c4 and trapping the bishop, and all of a sudden Rainn would be back in the game. So will MoistCritical see this? Here MoistCritical actually plays the absolute best move, which is knight to a4, and this is a really tricky move. You can't obviously take this knight with the queen because it's defended by the bishop, but also this is a discovered attack on black's queen, so black has to do something about that. Black now blocks this discovered attack with the move b4, and now we have bishop to e3 going after this c4 pawn, and you can't actually defend this pawn as black, so this pawn will be lost. Rainn goes for knight to e5. However, this simply loses the pawn. I mean, like I said, you couldn't have defended it anyway, but MoistCritical goes ahead and picks up that pawn with bishop takes c5, and now this is really tricky. You sort of have to just give up this exchange on f8 because with this last knight to e5 move, now after bishop takes c5, it's also a discovered attack on this knight. There's 2 attackers, only 1 defender, and also your rook is hanging. So if you try to save your knight with a move like knight takes f3, well, simply queen takes f3, and now you have 2 hanging rooks, and you can't even develop your knight anywhere safely to connect your rooks. So this would not work out. You could try a move. I think the best try here would be a move like knight b to c6, simply defending your knight again, and then you give up your rook like this and be down a rook. But at least you pick up white's bishop pair. So I think this would have been the best try from Rainn. But obviously, it's still completely losing because you're down a rook. But once again, I think it would have been the best try. But instead, we have rook to c8 from Rainn. And this simply loses the knight. So we have knight takes e5. And here I think Rainn missed that this knight was defending this bishop. It also makes sense why he would play rook to c8 in that if he missed that this knight defended the bishop, because he would be counterattacking this bishop. Or maybe he just decides, you know, I'll trade the rook for 2 minor pieces, which is definitely something you can do. So he goes ahead and goes for that trade. He plays rook takes c5, knight takes c5, and now queen takes c5. And here MoistCritical is still up a rook. So here MoistCritical could have gone for this rook to d8 check, but instead he goes for knight d7, which I think is a fantastic move because it's forcing the trade of even more pieces, which is definitely going to be good when you're up a rook. But here, after MoistCritical played knight to d7, he got really upset at himself because he thought that he missed a chance at checkmate in 1, which this is not checkmate in 1, first of all, because the bishop can block, and even if the bishop weren't there, then this queen could still block. So it wasn't actually checkmate, but he got really focused on this idea after knight to d7. We have queen to c6 now, Rainn saves his queen, and here, I mean, you can bring the knight back to e5. You could trade the knight, as trades are always going to be good when you're up a rook. So I think the cleanest win here would just be trading this knight. But MoistCritical was focused on something else. He was focused on getting this rook d8 checkmate move, which once again is not actually checkmate. So he goes for knight to f6 check, and his idea is next move I'm going to play rook d8 checkmate. But it obviously doesn't work because of bishop takes f6. Not only is there now a space for the king to go, but the bishop also defends this d8 square. So this just absolutely hangs a knight, and a terrible blunder by MoistCritical, maybe getting in a bit of time pressure there. He did have not a lot of time left on his clock, but he is still up the exchange, so he could still totally win this, and black is not even fully developed yet. So MoistCritical definitely still in the game. But now he goes for rook to d8, and he must have not seen that this bishop defended this d8 square, because this simply hangs a rook. And now Rainn is totally winning after not bishop takes d8, but Rainn actually plays king g7 because he did not see that this rook was hanging either. And so now MoistCritical is back in this game. He realizes his rook is hanging and brings it back to d3. So this is a good move. Here's Rainn. You can pick up this b2 pawn. However, Rainn continues development. Also a very good move. And here we have f4 from MoistCritical. And once again, we've seen a lot of PogChamps competitors make this mistake where they push their pawns in front of their king for basically no reason, I think. And this is just weakening this king. You're going to be susceptible to tactics along this diagonal later in the game, and it's just not going to be very good. You don't want to be weakening your king for no reason. The only thing I can really see that this f4 move does is it's taking away this e5 square from the knight, and that's pretty much it. And I mean, this knight can come to c5 anyway, so it's not really doing too much in my opinion, except weakening the king. So definitely a positional mistake from MoistCritical, and let's see if Rainn can take advantage of it. We have queen b5 now from Rainn, and now a4 from MoistCritical. And here you have a couple options. I think the best is simply b takes a3, but the most important thing about this position is you have to stay connected to your knight. So I think b takes a3 would have been the best because you simply break up white's pawn structure. But if you don't go for that, you should definitely go for something like a queen to b6 check, so that it's check, or queen to b7, just staying connected to your knight. However, instead we have queen to f5 from Rainn, and this simply hangs the knight. So I think he must have missed that his queen was the only defender of his knight, which was attacked by the rook. So MoistCritical definitely picks this up with rook takes d7, and he is back winning this game. He's in the driver's seat once again. We have bishop takes b2 now from Rainn, picking up that pawn, and g4 from MoistCritical. Once again, pushing those pawns in front of his king. Not going to be very good in the long term. It does gain a tempo on this queen, but it's definitely exposing your king, which is not something you want to be doing, especially when there are queens still on the board, and you're up a rook. Just keep your king safe, and black will not be able to get any counterplay on you, and you'll convert the position and you'll get a win. But we do have this g4 move from MoistCritical, and now we have queen c5 check from Rainn. King to h1, and this looks like it runs into a fork with queen to c6, a fork on the undefended rook. But it's actually okay, because after queen to c6 check, white can actually play queen to f3 or queen to g2, and now if black goes ahead and takes this rook, well, the queen was actually pinned to this rook on a8, so white could now pick up this rook on a8 and still be up a rook. So you're not actually losing a rook here as white, but MoistCritical did not see this, so we did have queen c6 from Rainn, and MoistCritical thought he was losing this rook, so he played rook d5. I don't know if this was just some move, or if he was thinking, okay, I'll at least make you have an isolated pawn for this, for taking my rook. But yeah, we have rook d5, and Rainn obviously takes this, and now black is probably better just because white's king is so exposed, even though material is even. I think black is actually up a pawn. Yeah, black's up a pawn, so black is definitely doing better here. And we'll see if Rainn can win this, or if Rainn blunders back to MoistCritical, or if we just have a draw. Who knows. We have king to g1 now, getting off this diagonal, and rook to e8. Queen to g2 and bishop d4 check. King back to h1, and now queen to c3 from Rainn. I think rook to e4 would have been better, because this queen to c3 move simply hangs this d pawn. Rook to e4 would have been sort of activating your last piece, and also blocking this diagonal, so that, yeah, I think rook to e4 would have been a much stronger move here from Rainn. But we have queen to c3, which hangs the d pawn, and MoistCritical definitely takes that. We have queen takes d5, rook to f8 now, defending this f7 square, which was attacked twice, and f5. So MoistCritical is now looking to rip open black's king side. We have a5 from Rainn, and f takes g6. H takes g6, and now there are 3 attackers and only 2 defenders on this f7 pawn. So MoistCritical definitely picks that up with rook takes f7, rook takes f7, and queen takes f7, king to h6, and material is white is up a pawn. But the problem here as MoistCritical is you need to get a win here, and your king is just super exposed. With the king this exposed and also queens on the board, it's going to be very hard to get a win, because black is going to have perpetual checks in a lot of scenarios. And if you ever trade the queens, well, then you're going into an opposite colored bishop endgame, and those are very, very often draws, even when one side is up 1, 2, or even 3 pawns. So here white is only up 1 pawn, and so it would be a very simple draw. So really, I think all of MoistCritical's winning chances are already evaporated, but who knows, a miracle could still happen. So let's just see how this game continued. We have h4, and now queen to e1 check. By the way, this h4 was very terrible from MoistCritical, because Rainn could have checkmate in 1. The queen covers these 2 squares, and the bishop covers g1. So queen h3 would have been checkmate in 1 there, but Rainn misses it. He plays queen to e1 instead. We have king g2 and a little bit of a king and queen dance here. Queen e2 check, king h1, queen to e4 check, king h2, bishop e5 check, king to g1, queen takes g4 check, king to f1, queen to h3 check, king to e2, queen to g2 check. And here MoistCritical says, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to bring my queen in, and these checks have to stop somehow. But now this obviously gives Rainn the option to trade queens. So queen takes f2 check, definitely the right call from Rainn. He only needs a draw to win the match, so this is definitely the right call. We have king takes f2 and king to h5, now going after this h-pawn, and Rainn could even be winning here. Probably not, since it still is opposite colored bishops, and even after black wins this h-pawn, he'll still only be up 1 pawn. But, these people are not computers. They're not going to be playing perfectly, so anything could still happen. Rainn could still even get the win and get the shutout on the match. We have king to g2, and now king takes h4, bishop to e6, and now g5 from Rainn, king to f3, bishop to c3, bishop d7, and bishop to d2, bishop to e6, and here Rainn makes a really surprising decision, in my opinion, which is he plays g4 check, and this simply loses the pawn after bishop takes g4, and so now Rainn kind of has to play a little more accurately, just so he doesn't lose this. I mean, because now you don't have this passed pawn. This just gives up a pawn for no reason. I can't see the reasoning behind this at all. But, it happened. We have king to g5 now, and bishop d7, king to f6, and now bishop to h3, king to e5, bishop to f1, king to d4, bishop to d3, now protecting the c-pawn, king to c3, and king to e4. And this is actually a huge mistake, because black actually has this really nice tactic where black's actually winning now. There's a zugzwang tactic here with bishop to c1, or you could also play bishop to h6, and white's totally in zugzwang. You can't move either of these pawns. Your only king moves, if you move the king away, for example, then we would have b3, and white, I mean, you cannot take this as white because you hang the bishop, and if you don't take it, then black will promote, so you cannot move your king away, and if you move this bishop, say, to f1, then you simply lose this pawn, and once again, this pawn will promote, so you'll have to sacrifice your bishop for it, and then black will be up a piece, and since this is the right-colored square and the right-colored bishop, black will get this win. So Rainn could have actually won there with this bishop to c1 or bishop to h6 move, but instead we have king to b2, which is totally fine because, once again, Rainn just needs a draw here. We have king to d4 and bishop to c3 check, king to c4, king to a3, king to c5. I really don't know why MoistCritical didn't play king to b5 here, just defending his pawn. But we have king to c5, and this simply loses the pawn. King takes a4, and now, I mean, Rainn can always, even if he somehow loses these 2 pawns, he can always sacrifice his bishop for the c-pawn, and it will be a draw by insufficient material. So he's pretty much locked up this match at this point. We have bishop b5 check, king a3, king to c4, and king to b2, king to d3, bishop to e1, and bishop to a4. And here the players agreed to a draw, which I think is a fine agreement, because you just cannot make any progress with this opposite color bishops. White will always have control of the light squares, and black will always have control of the dark squares. And there's only pawns on one side of the board, so this is just a very, very, very dead draw. So the match ends 1.5 to half. MoistCritical unfortunately loses the match, and Rainn will be moving on to the semifinals. So here are those standings for you. Here's the bracket. Benji Fishy will be playing Rainn Wilson in the semifinals, and Sardosh, he's going to be playing the winner of Ludwig versus Logic in the semifinals. Yeah, pretty good chess from both players. A few missed tactics in both games from both sides, so definitely a lot of room for improvement there. But I mean, that's really the case with all of these competitors. That's sort of the point of PogChamps, I think, is to get people who are not too experienced with chess, which is what makes it fun to watch. So definitely entertaining, at least. I don't think I have anything else to say about this game or this match, so check out my PogChamps 3 playlist. It's up there, and another chess video is going to be over there. So thank you for watching. I love you guys. Stay awesome, and I'll see you next time.